Don't forget, both of my parents were born in EU sectors, okay? I mean, my mother was Scotland, my father was Germany, my father's from Germany. Both of my parents are from the EU. Think about that moment for a fraction of a second. Look at the surroundings. Look at the context. The cameras are rolling. Over 1.6 million people are watching live across international broadcast networks. Press photographers are clicking frantically, flashbulbs strobing against the golden drapes of the Oval Office. Sitting just inches away, framed in the exact same television shot, is the actual Chancellor of Germany. And in that exact moment, with total, unshakable, absolute conviction, the President of the United States points toward the leader of Germany, looks directly into the lens of world history, and informs her, and the entire world, that his own father was born in her country, not raised there, not visited there as a child, born there. My father is German, right? Was German, and born in a very wonderful place in Germany. There was no stutter, no hesitation, no nervous glance toward an advisor sitting in the corner with a briefing folder. It was delivered with the relaxed, supreme confidence of a man stating that the sky is blue or that water is wet. It was dramatic. It was jarring. It was completely, undeniably, objectively false. Because Fred Trump was not born in Germany. Fred Trump was born in the Bronx, New York, on October 11, 1905. It is printed in black ink on a piece of paper in the New York City Vital Statistics Archive. It is documented in his official obituary published in the New York Times. It is a matter of clear, unalterable historical fact that has been public knowledge for more than a century. So why would the most powerful man on the planet stand in front of global news cameras and relocate his own biological father across 4,000 miles of the Atlantic Ocean? Was it a simple slip of the tongue? A fleeting moment of senior fatigue? A harmless geographical confusion? If you think this was just a simple mistake, you are missing the most terrifying psychological mechanism at play here. Because this was not the first time he said it. It wasn't even the second time, or the third, or the fourth. Before this specific press conference took place, Donald Trump had been corrected on this exact fact, directly, explicitly, with official documentation placed right in front of his eyes, 4 separate times across 4 separate years. 4 times, aides, journalists, and records proved to him that his father was born in the Bronx. And yet, on the 5th attempt, sitting right next to the Chancellor of Germany, he looked into the camera and said it again. Why? What happens to the human mind when certainty completely detaches itself from reality? And more importantly, what happens to a nation when millions of people choose to believe the certainty instead of the facts? To understand how a society reaches a point where reality becomes optional, you have to look at it through the eyes of someone standing outside the storm looking in. Picture a crowded comedy theater in London or Los Angeles. The lights dim. The audience sits in hushed anticipation. On stage steps the legendary John Cleese, a comedy icon, a master of satire, a man who built his entire career on analyzing the absolute absurdity of human behavior with Monty Python. Beside him sits Charlie. The host leaned forward, gripped his microphone, and asked a question that was hanging in the air across the entire globe. As objectively as you can, if such a thing is possible, how have you noticed that America is different now that Trump is in power? The audience broke into nervous, knowing laughter. Cleese paused. He adjusted himself in his seat. He works extensively in the United States. He knows the culture. He loves the American audience. He famously jokes about his bucket list, a simple, pragmatic rule for life. I never want to be cold again, which is why he avoids British winters whenever possible. But when asked about the political climate on the ground in America, the humor shifted into something much darker. Does the Pope? In the woods? Cleese quipped, sparking an instant burst of applause and laughter from the crowd. We see it obviously here from the news, the host pushed further. Completely mad on the ground there. Do you feel it? Cleese stopped smiling. The laughter in the room began to quiet down as he described an eerie, surreal experience he had while touring the country immediately after the election. I don't want to admit how mad it is, Cleese said quietly. But Eric and I were on tour, and we went on stage the night after the election. We got out in front of 2,000 people, and they were sitting there like this. He mimicked a posture of total, paralyzed shock. Wide eyes, unmoving jaws, slouched shoulders. They could not believe what had happened, Cleese continued. And we said to them, it's our duty to cheer you up tonight. They all roared and clapped, but it is completely mad. Cleese wasn't just talking about political disagreement. He was talking about a breakdown in basic logic, a reality rupture. I mean, the guy says, 3 days ago? He says, I've sent an armada towards North Korea. And then we find out 2 days later that the fleet is actually sailing in the complete opposite direction, towards Australia. Pause for a second and absorb that. A commander-in-chief announces to the global press corps that a nuclear-capable naval strike group is steaming toward the Korean peninsula to deter a hostile regime. World capitals go on high alert. Defense analysts draft emergency briefings. Financial markets flutter. And 48 hours later, satellite tracking maps reveal the strike group was actually heading south toward the Indian Ocean for scheduled exercises thousands of miles away. And that's what people see, Cleese pointed out. Except that his core supporters are still sitting at 38-39%. They still think he's great. Then Cleese delivered an anecdote that captured the psychological defense mechanism in its purest, most startling form. He recalled watching a news broadcast featuring a female supporter defending Trump after the release of the infamous Access Hollywood recording, the tape where Trump boasted on a bus about using his celebrity status to grab women without consent. A journalist asked the supporter point blank, "What do you feel about that time when he was recorded on the bus saying those things?" The woman didn't deny the recording existed. She didn't claim the audio was synthesized or faked. Instead, without missing a single beat, she looked at the reporter with total sincerity and replied, "He would never have said that if he'd known he was being recorded." Read that sentence again. He would never have said that if he'd known he was being recorded. Notice what happened in her mind? The moral issue was not that he said it. The moral issue was not his behavior or his mindset toward women. The transgression was that he got caught. In her reality, the lie or the exposure was the fault of the recording device, not the man speaking into it. When belief becomes that bulletproof, facts don't matter anymore. Documentation doesn't matter. Birth certificates don't matter. Which brings us right back to the central mystery. The father who was born in Germany, except he wasn't. Let's trace the paper trail. Let's slow down the sequence of events that led to one of the most astonishing moments in modern broadcasting history. It was late at night. The television studio lights cast a crisp, cool glow over the set of The Late Show. Stephen Colbert walked directly to his desk. If you watch late-night television, you know the standard rhythm. The host walks out, does a high-energy monologue, dances a little, trades banter with the band leader, high-fives the audience, and takes his seat to a wall of roaring applause. Not this night. Colbert walked out in complete, deliberate silence. He was carrying a single, crisp white sheet of paper inside a plain, dark folder. He sat down at his desk without the usual entrance jokes. He adjusted his glasses. He didn't smile. The studio audience sensed the shift immediately. The room went quiet. Colbert looked directly into the primary camera lens and introduced the clip. There was Donald Trump on screen, standing next to European leaders, gesturing with his hands. "My father was born in a wonderful part of Germany, very West Germany, and I'll never forget his favorite German saying." Colbert cut back to himself. He reached into the folder on his desk. He didn't deliver a punchline. He pulled out the first document. "Yes, it's true," Colbert said with razor-sharp sarcasm. "Friedrich Trump was born in a very wonderful place in Germany, New York City, in 1905. The audience let out a brief ripple of laughter, but Colbert wasn't finished, not even close. He held the paper up so the camera could zoom in until the text filled the entire broadcast monitor. The document was an official, state-certified copy of Fred Trump's birth certificate. The camera focused on the vital line: location of birth, Bronx, New York. Date of birth, October 11th, 1905. Not Germany, never Germany, not a village in Bavaria, not a town along the Rhine. The Bronx, New York City. The audience laughed. But then, almost instantly, the laughter died down into an uneasy silence. Because as the document remained on screen, the audience realized something far more disturbing was happening on that stage. Colbert reached back into his folder. "Now," Colbert said, his voice dropping an octave, "you might think this was a one-time slip." He pulled out a second sheet of paper. 2018, a documented interview. On screen appeared the quote from 2018 where Trump publicly claimed his father was born in Germany. A reporter corrected him at the time, pointing out that his father was born in New York, while his grandfather, Friedrich Trump, was the one who emigrated from Karlstadt, Germany. Trump acknowledged it, and then moved on. Colbert pulled out a third sheet of paper. 2019, CBS News. A year later, on national television, Trump made the exact same claim again. "My father is German, was German, born in a very wonderful place in Germany." Once again, news anchors and fact-checkers immediately flagged the statement, published the birth certificate, and issued formal corrections across major networks. Colbert pulled out a fourth sheet of paper. 2020, Fox News. The exact same claim, the exact same correction. 4 separate years. 4 separate documentations. 4 separate times where historians, journalists, and staff members showed him the physical birth certificate or pointed out the basic genealogical fact that his father, Fred Trump, was born in the Bronx in 1905, while his mother, Mary Ann MacLeod, was born in Scotland. 4 times he was given the correct information. And then came the 5th time, sitting right beside Angela Merkel, the actual leader of Germany, surrounded by international diplomats and world media. Colbert stacked all 4 pages neatly on his desk. He held them up side by side with the original birth certificate. 4 corrections, Colbert said quietly. 4 separate years. 4 separate times someone showed him the birth certificate. And today, sitting next to the actual Chancellor of Germany, he pointed at the woman's country and said it again. The room was so quiet you could hear the subtle hum of the studio air conditioning. This was no longer a joke about a politician misspeaking. This was an undeniable demonstration of a psychological phenomenon that defies normal human comprehension. Colbert leaned forward, placing his hands flat on the desk over the documents. "This is the man," Colbert continued, reciting the public record, "who told the country he has one of the greatest memories of anyone who has ever lived. This is the man who told the country he went to Wharton, top of his class. This is the man who told the country he aced a cognitive test so decisively that the doctors were shocked." Colbert paused. The dramatic weight of the contrast hung in the air like a heavy fog. And today, he could not remember where his own father was born. A fact printed in the New York Times obituary. A fact his own niece, Mary Trump, had to publicly clarify on social media that very same morning. A fact that has been permanently locked into the public record since October 11, 1905, and has not changed once across any of the 4 years or 5 public statements that attempted to relocate it across the ocean to Germany. Let's stop and analyze what is actually happening here.